Once upon a time, in a faraway land lived a prince. It was now time for the prince to wed, but unfortunately, his princess was nowhere to be found. In order to find his princess, he travelled all around the world. All the princesses in the neighbouring kingdoms visited the king's castle to meet the prince. But the prince was having a hard time trying to pick the right one. His father, the king, wanted his son to wed a real princess. After trying for so many years, he lost all hope in finding the right princess. Sad, hopeless, and deep in his thoughts, the prince continued to live his life. The king and queen were indeed very sad at this situation. Another sad night, as he sat there thinking, a big storm began. Lightning was striking and the sound of the thunder was echoing in the castle. The prince was having a hard time trying to sleep as he watched the lightning strike from his window. But on the other hand, he couldn't help but think about his future princess. Amongst all the noise in the castle, one of the servants realized that the door was knocking. She opened the door and noticed a shivering young girl that was drenched from the rain. Amongst the state the poor young girl was in, she still looked very beautiful and elegant, and with great difficulty she spoke.
"Will you take me in, please? I'm all alone. I got lost in the woods."
The servant felt sorry for her, and so she ran and gave the news to the king and queen.
"We cannot refuse to take in a visitor at this hour of the night. Take her in."
The king quickly let the guards know of this situation and ordered them. The guards took the girl in the castle's living room and sat her in front of the fireplace. Seeing the girl's clothes drenched in water, the queen ordered the servants so that they bring some appropriate clothing for the girl. All alone with the girl, the queen asked,
"At this hour and in this weather, may I ask what it is that you're looking for?"
"I'm a princess from a faraway land. My castle has been attacked by my enemies. In order to protect me, Mother and Father secretly sent me away with 2 soldiers, but once it was midnight, due to the storm, we lost each other, and here I am. I found your castle. Thank you so much for taking me in."
The queen found it hard to believe, but even so found it harder to send her away from the castle. The prince was curious to see who this mysterious girl was. He wanted to meet her. At that point, the girl was wearing the dress the queen had given her. Her hair had dried, and she was feeling more like herself now. Now that she looked much more elegant and beautiful, as the prince entered the room, he couldn't believe the beauty and elegance and was mesmerized by her presence. But still, he wanted to know for sure that she was indeed a princess. The queen told the prince that she was going to handle the situation and find out if she was a real princess.
"Is she a real princess? We will find out tonight."
The prince and princess chatted away the whole night. The prince, as fond as he was of this girl, he was trying to get to know her better. The queen got the guest's room ready for the young girl, and she placed a pea under her bed and covered it with 7 mattresses. The young girl slept in this strange bed that was prepared for her that night. The following morning, the queen waited for the young girl to wake up, and when she did, she asked her,
Did you sleep well last night?
I'm very fortunate that you gave me shelter, but I had great difficulty trying to sleep.
Oh, really? I wonder why. May I ask why?
My body is in pain. My back aches. It was as if the whole night I had slept on something really hard.
This is the exact answer the Queen was looking for. She knew that only a princess could feel such discomfort coming through a bed covered in 7 layers of mattresses. She went next to the prince and explained all that happened. Hearing all of this, and finally knowing that she was a real princess, the prince couldn't hide his happiness. He told the king that he would like to wed the princess, and so the king accepted his son's offer to marry the princess. The prince asked that the princess stay in his castle for a few more days until the war was over in her kingdom. In fact, he sent out his own troops to help save her country. And soon later, the prince proposed to the princess.
Will you marry me, my princess?
And as soon as he got his answer, they lived happily ever after.
With her golden hair, always smiling face, Pollyanna was a 10-year-old little girl spreading joy around her. But she had lost her parents when she was really young and was left all alone. For some time, she stayed in the orphanage. After some time had passed, her wealthy aunt accepted to look after her. Her aunt, Miss Polly, prepared the small attic for Pollyanna. The housemaid Nancy was really happy about this. Hopefully our little guest will be successful in cheering up grumpy Miss Polly. When arrived at home, Pollyanna was crying with happiness. She hugged her auntie around her neck, but her auntie was somewhat serious. She took Pollyanna and showed her to her room. Pollyanna was stunned when she saw the size and the wealth of this house. Her auntie showed her room in the attic. This is your room, and dinner starts at 6 p.m. Don't forget. Pollyanna liked her room very much. Having seen all the other rooms in the house, Pollyanna did not bother to think once as to why her auntie gave her the room in the attic. Right at 6 o'clock, Miss Polly sat at the dinner table, but Pollyanna had not arrived yet. Where is this girl? Would you like me to go and call her, Miss Polly? No. After dinner, Miss Polly went over to her room and noticed the room was empty. She immediately went over to the garden to tell the gardener that she was missing. The gardener, on the other hand, pointed over to a rock on the hill. She was over there. In a rush, Nancy ran over to Pollyanna, and together they made their way to the villa. Didn't matter what the situation was, Pollyanna always managed to keep a positive attitude about everything. This left Nancy amazed. She asked Pollyanna what the secret to this was.
The glad game. My father taught me this. When I was young, a very helpful lady once sent us crutches. When I asked as to why, she said, so that as long as they were in our sight, we would be able to appreciate the fact that we didn't need to use them and be glad. It is because of that day that whenever me and Daddy feel like we're in doubt, we think of that day and we find a reason to be glad.
Further into the evening, Pollyanna was in her room on her bed, crying hysterically.
Father! My father who lives amongst the angels! I'm trying to play our game, you know that. But if you were stuck in an attic, in the dark, sitting all by yourself, you too would find it hard to be glad.
The following day, Pollyanna went downstairs to the garden and hugged her auntie.
Auntie! Beloved Auntie! This morning I am so grateful to be alive.
Is that how we say good morning? After having said this, Aunt Polly turned around and left. Watching them from afar, the old gardener's eyes went watery. He then went over to Pollyanna and told her how much she looked like her mother. Knowing that the gardener knew her mother made her happy. As time went on by, Pollyanna's life at the villa had gotten better. She would have her breakfast, then straight after, start doing her homework with her auntie. And then after lunch, she would have free time until 6 o'clock. She would even do some of the grocery shopping for the house. One day, in the town, she saw a man wearing a long black coat with a cylinder-shaped hat. Although she tried being friends with him, she couldn't make much sense out of what the man was saying to her. Some time had passed and she saw the same man again. She tried to talk to him once again. This time round, he too made conversation with her. Nancy was in shock because although the man, Mr. Pendleton, was very wealthy, he lived in a huge house all by himself and never ever did he speak to anyone. The following day, Pollyanna went home with a very weak dog. Miss Polly didn't say a word. But the following day after that one, she brought a boy home and Miss Polly was extremely cross with her.
Enough, Pollyanna! Amongst all the other hideous things you've done, this is by far the worst. As if it wasn't enough that you brought all the cats and dogs from the streets, now you're bringing beggars to my house.
I'm not a beggar, madam.
After having said that, the boy rushed out of the house, but Pollyanna was determined to save this kid from the streets. In September, Pollyanna started school. It didn't take long for Pollyanna to like her school. One day, during a visit, Mr. Pendleton asked Pollyanna not to leave and if she could stay with him. Of course, it was impossible for Pollyanna to give an answer. Mr. Pendleton explained everything to Pollyanna.
Back when I was young, I fell in love with your mom. I loved her dearly. But your mom never loved me back. Then soon later, she married your father, and they moved away from the city.
Ever since that day, Mr. Pendleton always seemed to be upset towards the world around him. He would always have a long face. But having Pollyanna look like her mother with her sincere looks made it possible for him to look at the world in a more positive manner. This way, by having Pollyanna next to him all the time, he would have a reason to live.
Move next to me, and together we will be happy. You can see me as a father, and I'll see you like a daughter.
But although her auntie didn't show it, she knew she loved her very much. And she didn't want to leave her auntie. She didn't know how to tell this to Mr. Pendleton. At last, she found a solution. She wanted Mr. Pendleton to take Jimmy in, the kid her aunt refused to look after, and thought this way both Mr. Pendleton and Jimmy would be happy, and Pollyanna could visit them both more often. Mr. Pendleton asked for them to come together the following week. But after a few days, a very unfortunate accident happened. A car hit Pollyanna. After opening her eyes a day later in the hospital, Pollyanna was very happy to be alive. She didn't want her auntie to leave her side. She was living the happy moment of her auntie calling her my darling. A few days later, Pollyanna had left the hospital, but she could no longer use her legs. When Mr. Pendleton visited Pollyanna, he told Miss Polly about his offer to Pollyanna and how she rejected the offer due to her auntie. After hearing this story, Miss Polly's love suddenly grew much bigger for her. Just so that her niece would be happy, she would allow the cats and dogs to go up to her room. She would allow anything that made Pollyanna happy. The doctor doctor that they had been waiting for from the city came 1 week late. After Pollyanna's checkup, the doctor had to give the bad news.
Unfortunately, this young girl will not be able to walk.
Oh no! After hearing this, Miss Polly began to cry and soon after fainted. After hearing her auntie's voice, Pollyanna began to cry hysterically. Right then, everyone was waiting for bitter, sad days. Everyone was shedding away their tears for her. Pollyanna began to tell everyone that visited her about the glad game. In order to make Pollyanna happy, Mr. Pendleton decided to adopt Jimmy. When Pollyanna heard the good news, she was so happy. Miss Polly couldn't believe that she was the only one that didn't know the glad game. Once she began talking to Nancy, she found out about everything. She then quickly rushed over to Pollyanna. So, the glad game. From now on, we will play this game together.
Yay! This is by far the best news, Aunt Polly!
Meanwhile, Mr. Pendleton's doctor wanted to see Pollyanna, but there was one problem. Due to an argument they had many years ago with Miss Polly, he hadn't stepped a foot into that house for 15 years. In the end, both ends had come to an agreement and they took her to a hospital out of the city. Mr. Pendleton's doctor looked after Pollyanna and said that there is hope. A few months had passed. Auntie Polly received a letter from Pollyanna.
Dearest Aunt Polly, I have great news. My therapy has ended with great results. At last, I can walk. The doctors here say that I can return home soon. Wish I could walk the way back. Oh, how happy I am. Everything makes me happy. In fact, I'm even happy that I couldn't use my legs for some time. Because if it didn't happen, I would never appreciate them as much as I do now. Hoping to see you soon. With love, Pollyanna.
It was a cold and snowy New Year's night. The people were passing by with their warm coats, gloves and scarves. They were all in a rush to get somewhere. Some were late and rushing to get home, and some were going to a venue to celebrate the new year. Children were running around on the streets throwing snowballs to each other. Of course, they were the ones enjoying the snow the most. They were playing with each other and laughing hysterically. But on the streets, there was a girl, different than the ones that were playing. This little girl was standing in the middle of the street, watching the other kids play. She did not have a hat to protect her from the cold like others. Her clothes were light and ripped, and the slippers on her feet didn't fit her right. They were big. She was holding a box in her hands, shivering from the freezing cold. The little girl barely noticed the car coming right at her.
Hey kids, stay on the side of the road, you're gonna get run over!
The little girl threw herself on the sidewalk that second. But while she was running, the very big slippers on her feet flew off. When she was on the sidewalk, she turned around and looked. She saw a boy running with her slippers. "My slippers!" She yelled and ran after him, but the kid ran away fast. Having no choice but to walk barefoot, she sought for a shelter next to a wall. She opened the box she had been holding and she put it down. She was looking in the box full of matches with her eyes watery from the cold. This was a little match girl, but she could not even sell one box of matches that day. If she could make a sale and earn some money, she could go home and have at least a bowl of warm soup with her mother. So she started yelling with her thin, shivering voice from cold and sadness.
Matches! Matches! Anyone wants matches? Matches!
Nobody on the street paid any attention to her, so she sat down next to the wall. Her fingers started to ache from the cold. She could not bear the pain anymore. Somehow, she had to warm up. She opened a box and pulled out a match. Her fingers were numb, and she could barely hold a match. With her shivering hands, she lit the match on the wall, and suddenly a warm orange light surrounded her. Poor girl passed the match from one hand to the other to warm her fingers. Her hands were not cold anymore. She found herself in front of a burning stove. She stared at the fire and started dreaming. She was sitting in front of a big stove in a beautiful room. She had a woolen sweater on her, furry boots on her feet, and a beanie on her head. It was so hot she began to sweat. But suddenly, the match went out. With the match out, those sweet dreams also vanished. Her little fingers began to freeze and ache once again. She lit up another match. At that moment, a cold wind blew. The little girl turned to the wall to keep the match from going out, and she covered the fire with her hands. Whilst she was looking at it, the wall suddenly vanished and opened up. There was a big room inside. There were all sorts of food spread on a table with a white cloth, and the silver candlesticks on the table lit up the room like daylight. She stared at the table and saw that in the middle of the table there was a beautifully grilled big piece of meat. She immediately ripped a piece of it and put it in her mouth. Suddenly, she wasn't hungry anymore. The little match girl wanted to take another piece of meat. She reached out, but the match she had in her hand went out pretty fast. Poor girl's hand burned and she threw the match away.
Ow! Ow!
As soon as she threw away the match, the feast on the table and the room vanished. The wall reappeared. Little match girl lit another match. Now she was in an even bigger dream. She was sitting under a tree on a summer night, looking at the stars above. It was still warm, even though it was nighttime. The little girl could not take her eyes off of the stars. She never saw the sky and the stars so clear and sparkling before. Then suddenly, she saw a shooting star. She thought to herself, "There goes another one of us flying into eternity." These were actually her grandmother's words. At that moment, she saw her grandmother appear.
When you see a shooting star, know that someone will take its place, my dear.
Her grandmother was visible for a brief moment, and then when she disappeared, the little match girl called after her.
Grandmother, stop! Don't go! Don't go, please! I really missed you!
To see her grandmother one more time, she lit up another match. She forgot how she was freezing from cold in the middle of the street and started dreaming once again. Every time she lit up a match, she felt as if she was seeing her grandmother and hearing her voice. The little girl lit up another match. Her surroundings lit up like daylight. She never saw her grandmother this beautiful before. Her loving face made her forget all the cold and bitter days she had ever been through. She did not want this moment to finish, so she lit up the final match in a hurry. Her grandmother appeared in front of her again. She reached out her arms to hold the little match girl's hand. They started to fly up into the sky together. The little girl felt a sudden relief. There was no cold or hunger anymore. At that moment, another shooting star went on by. In the morning, the people who passed by on the street saw the little match girl laying down by the wall, her eyes closed but with a sweet smile on her face. She had a lot of burnt matches around her. The matches which, with their flames, brought her dreams alive that no one would ever dream about.